The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be a world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
All right, we are back. Pretty quick turnaround between episode 140 and 141, but blessed to be joined once again by my part-time co-host for this season, Mitchell Salazar, as we gear up for stop number 2 on the 2023 WSL Championship Tour season, the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach. Mitch, thanks so much for joining me once again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dave, but it's sad news. It's a sad day for surfing just in general. We're recording on the day that we lost Larry Haynes. And, I just want to say that guy was a pioneer when it comes to broadcasting the sport of surfing. I don't think without him, we'd be at the position that we're at today, just as a company and an organization and as a sport as a whole. I knew Larry for years, but I know you had a deeper relationship with him. And, man, it's a big loss for us, Dave. I really loved him, and he'll be missed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I think that's really well said. I would have met Larry in 2006, kind of right after I started. And, at the time, Action Sports Group, which was running Surfer and Surfing Magazine, they also ran a bunch of events in North America. They worked with Darren Brillhart, and they ran events in Santa Cruz and Newport Beach, and the surf bout at Lower Trussell's, a lot of QS events, and they would employ Larry to do the water filming. And so, working in media at the time, I got to know him really well. And even from the very first time I met him, he was just kind. He was just such a kind person, and he was so uniquely talented at what he did. And I had the really good fortune to know him for, that's what, almost 20 years, 17 years or whatever it is. And, in terms of the depth of anyone's relationship with him, I'm fortunate to have known him for what he did, but I would say that anyone who just met him at Pipeline probably felt the same. He just treated everyone with kindness, and he was so stoked. And, I know we were talking about a little bit earlier in the day, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people today about it, and so have I. And everyone's so bummed, and I guess he was just a unique person, and the thing that makes me happy about him is he seemed like he lived the life he wanted to live. He was always doing what he wanted to do. He loved being in the water, and he was just sort of incomparable at what he was able to achieve. So it's a huge loss for the surfing world. But I hope he's probably making people happy wherever he is right now. So it's really sad.
Yeah, I was actually checking out Chucky Regano's Instagram this morning, and he had a really cool story about Larry that when we were in El Salvador last year for the CT event at Punta Roca, Larry actually got drifted down so far that he had to walk out into the streets and walked back to the event site. It was probably a 5 to 10 minute walk in his full suit with his gear and everything. And he was just smiling at everybody the whole time. And as you were mentioning, he was one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. And that's really what I'm going to miss about him, is his smile and what he brought to us, as a sport, as a community. And he's going to be severely missed. May he rest in peace. And he's catching the eternal wave now, Dave.
Yeah. So, rest in peace, Larry. We're going to miss you. And I hope we get to catch up down to track, wherever that is and whenever that is. So we'll switch gears here for a second, as challenging as that is. But we've got Sunset Beach coming up. And Sunset Beach has been a fixture of professional surfing since its inception in 1976, where it served as a venue for not just one, but 2 stops on the inaugural World Tour. First, it was the Lightning Bolt Professional Surfing Championships, which was held at both Makaha and Sunset Beach. I'd love to know what the details were on that particular permit. And that event was won by Roy Russell And then later in the year, it served as the venue for the Avis Duke Classic, which was won by James Jones. You know, it's been a championship tour event. World titles have been decided there. It's been the big, scary monster at the end of the qualifying series in the past. It's been a bit of everything. And now it's the second stop on the CT. I personally have had the good fortune of staying at a house right there on the beach for a number of years during my tenure at the ASPWSL. And it is a wave that has evoked so many emotions in me and has shaped my own surfing experience pretty radically in a way that when I was a kid and even as a young adult, I never ever thought it would. But I've never had to put a jersey on and compete out there, which is something that you, Mitch Salazar, have had to do. You know, tell me about your first experience at Sunset Beach.
Well, Dave, you know, it was 2012. I was 18 years old, straight out of high school. I was living on the North Shore with one of my best friends, Kalani David, and I ended up surfing in the HIC Pro. I'd already, you know, had a decent year on the QS as soon as I got out of high school. And I thought to myself, okay, like this is a wave that I've been spending a lot of hours in. You know, I know the wave quite well during free surfs, but competing there is a whole different monster. First heat, I got Tane Wallace from New Zealand, who was a great surfer back in the day. He's around my age, late 20s. And then I had TJ Barron, who's a North Shore local, one of the best surfers out there on the entire North Shore. I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to learn from them. I'm going to kind of scout the region and see what's going on. I don't think I completed a wave all the way to the channel. And you know me, I love my statistics. I'm a huge fan of other sports and the way we involve statistics into the sport of surfing now too. I surfed 5 events at Sunset Beach during my QS career. I never made a single heat. And if I'm, you know, harsh on others, I'm harsh on myself too. That's a wave that I can't figure out for the life of myself. I've logged in hours, days, ton of minutes in the water there at Sunset Beach. And I can tell you, it might be the most difficult wave I've ever had to surf in my life. It moves so much. It's very tide dependent. When the wind gets strong and it's big, it's very hard to get into waves. And it truly does feel like an arena. It almost feels like you're in that movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe and you have everybody around you. There's so much noise coming down. And to find markers at that place is extremely difficult because the swell direction changes and it breaks at another spot. And I've had the fortune of surfing both Sunset in a jersey and without it at Sunset Point on the West Bowl and on the outside too. So I can tell you this wave changes a lot and it's very dependent on where the swell direction is coming from, Dave.
For sure. I, you know, my own first experience there, I'd done a couple of years on tour, always stayed, you know, either on the other side of Waimea out at Leftovers or Alligator Rock or, you know, surfed a lot of kind of the easier waves, like as far as civilians go and had always kind of ventured up that way, but it was like, you know, the biggest board I brought's a 6'3". I'm not going out there. And then one day, the icon, you know, one of the founders of the sport, Randy Rarick, called up our CEO, Brody Carr at the time and said, let's go surf Sunset. It's a beautiful day. It was kind of, I think it was maybe after the season had finished or in between events. And it was super clean, like few feet overhead, west swell, like beautiful. And Randy's like, I've got a bunch of boards, you know, here's an 8.6 like bear. Like he kind of like, as like the surf geek fan in me was like, oh, you wished for this and now here you are and now you're in deep shit. Like, and I'm like waxing this board up and I'm going, oh no. And it was like, as far as all my sessions since then, like it was probably like the nicest, cleanest, most welcoming day. But you've got that kind of like perception in your head, like I'm going to get cleaned up and die essentially. But it's such a fun wave. Like, and as you pointed out, different swells, different sizes, it breaks on different parts of the reef. And yeah, geez, I mean, I do really consider myself so fortunate to have stayed there for so many years and gotten to surf it on so many different conditions and different spots. And the thing, and I'm curious to see if this translates to like a higher caliber contest surfer like yourself, but the thing that I noticed is even as I was getting older and maybe not as physically gifted as I was when I was younger, I would surf the wave so much better just from reps and experience and understanding like where am I lining up, which wave looks good, what's my entry speed, like what size board am I riding, like how long do I delay my bottom turn. It's just this amazing kind of 3D chess kind of venue, even as a free surfer. And for yourself, obviously the contest mindset is different than the free surfing mindset, but did you find for yourself that just the experience over the years was actually the most valuable factor in getting more comfortable out there?
No doubt. And especially, I think, besides that, the biggest thing was paddling out when it was big. I always wanted to challenge myself in conditions where I felt uncomfortable, because when it got smaller, I knew that I was going to be able to sustain the amount of water that was moving out there. That's one thing that a lot of people underestimate about Sunset Beach. It is a deep water wave. It does not break on a shallow reef. It comes from deep water. And if you get caught inside, good luck, because that is a gnarly wave to take on the head. And especially if you're getting, a 5-6 wave set on the head too. What I really took from it, despite not having a good competitive career there, I spent a lot of time in the water. I would have to say, besides pipe and backdoor, that's easily the wave that I've logged the most hours in, mainly because I was staying there with a lot of my friends, but it's also because where there's a lot of contests there. So as a competitor, right, and as somebody that's assisting my friends as a caddy for the most part too, you're seeing the wave from a different perspective. You're giving them all the knowledge that you've gained over the years within 20 to 30 minutes when they're competing themselves too. And essentially, as a caddy, you need to be listening to the beach announcer quite a bit, because it's very difficult to listen out there for your scores and your situation. So that's another thing that I think Sunset Beach brings to the table, is that you almost need to surf like if it weren't a heat. You need to go out there in those 20 to 30 minutes and just rely on surfing and knowing what your level is, and surfing the waves that you do catch to the best of your abilities.
That really tracks with what you hear from a lot of the elite level championship tour surfers, and sort of since like time immemorial, where it is an amazing wave to test your ocean knowledge. When you're provided with the sections, you can see some of the most radical power surfing of the season out there. But it is a bit like a roulette table, and this goes for fantasy surfer, anyone that bets on surfing. Like, you're like, this surfer for sure is going to do well out there. And it's such a huge playing field that occasionally those guys and girls that are the favorites just come up unlucky. Rhythm's a huge deal out there. And as we said, it was a championship tour venue for a long time. It then became a QS venue. And looking at the results from last year when it came back on as a championship tour event, on the men's side, you had, replacement surfer wildcard Baron Mamiya won the men's side, and he was followed up by, Kanoa Igarashi, Kyle Belly, Ethan Ewing, and a number of surfers who weren't necessarily like title contenders. They had a little bit of that QS DNA in them, or they're fresh off the QS. And similarly, when you're looking at the women's side, Brisa Hennessy, who had fallen off tour the year before and scrapped her way back on through the Challenger Series, wins the event. Malia Manuel comes runner-up. Gabriella Bryant and Betty Lou Sakura Johnson at equal third. It is one of those venues, I think, that it's almost better to go in with that fresh humility, maybe coming in off the QS or the CS and feeling like, okay, I have to make my own luck out here. It's not just the waves are not just gonna come to me because I'm sort of ordained to be the world champ. Is that a fair assessment from your experience as well?
No doubt. There's a lot of truth in that, Dave, because look at even the runner-up on the men's side last year, Kanoa Igarashi. A lot of people believe that he's been the best beach break surfer to come out of, the U.S. region and now representing Japan. There's no doubt about it, because when you compare the results that we've seen in the past from people like Jordy Smith in 2006, he was a runner-up to Joel Parkinson that year when he was only 18 years old. But where does he come from? Durban. Mostly beach breaks. CJ Hobga, the last goofy footer to win in 2008, he's a beach break surfer originally himself too. So I think having that kind of approach of wanting to catch as many waves as you can, but really the first good wave that seems to pop up, you need to be going on those waves, because out there, I would really have to say time is your enemy. You get caught inside Next thing you know, you're losing 10 to 15 minutes out of your heat. You're exhausted. You don't have the same kind of energy that you would have had at the beginning of the heat. It becomes a real challenge. And I really like to think of this as a waterman's wave too. And this is where I think some wild cards and injury replacement surfers, such as Kai Lenny, has a great chance of doing well out here, Dave.
That's interesting. That is really interesting. So I'm glad you brought up the wild card replacement segment, because this event has quite a few. You know, on the women's side, we've got the wild card Zoe McDougall. Mm-hmm. On the men's side, we've got wild cards Keanu Ossing and Kai Lenny. And then we have a number of surfers who have been injured, so we've got replacement surfers. On the men's side, you've got Carlos Munoz in for Ramsey Bukiem. You've got Eli Hanneman in for Jadson Andre. And then on the women's side, you've got Teresa Bonvalot in for Joanne Defay and Luana Silva in for Sophie McCulloch. You know, looking at just that group of seven, you know, the wild cards and the replacements. You mentioned Kai Lenny. You know, what other surfers do you kind of predict could shake things up based on these fresh entrants into the elite field?
Yeah, I think on the men's side, you know, you look at past champions, whether Pro Junior, QS, the CT level. I really like Seth Moniz. He's been a Pro Junior champion out there before. Jack Robinson has won both a Pro Junior. And remember in 2019, he qualified with the last-minute victory at Sunset Beach in the last QS of the season, too. So he's one person that I really look out for. Obviously, he's got a lot of momentum coming off of the win at Pipe, too. But I like the chances of people like Kai Lenny. One event that I surfed in, you know, Ian Walsh, who's a renowned big wave surfer, won the event. And back then, you know, it was a big event. Joel Centello was in there. A lot of powerhouse Hawaiian surfers that are, you know, very good surfers at both Haleiwa and Sunset Beach were dominating those events. Fred Fataccia, Danny Fuller, Evan Valier, all these people that have grown up in heavy water waves know this place very well. So that's why I also have to go on the women's side. Somebody like Gabriella Bryan that made the semis last year has a great shot. And obviously the local surfer, Luana Silva, who's a replacement surfer in this event, I think should do very well.
That's an interesting one. Kai Lenny is such an interesting figure as far as like CTA wildcards go as well. I think probably out of any of the stops on tour, Sunset Beach makes the most sense for him. And he is almost in like incomparable space as a waterman. He's so gifted at so many different crafts and huge waves of consequence. And for someone just as an outside observer, it does look like he's challenged himself to get better at what I guess we would consider high performance surfing. You know, how does he get to the CT? Can he match levels with the likes of John, et cetera? And I think he's kind of gone on the record and saying like, yeah, that's a goal of mine. In the past, his sort of forays into the QS haven't delivered those results. He is a great surfer. It'll be interesting to see how his greatness stacks up against the greatness of the championship tour surfers, in my opinion, right? Because it is something where there is a little bit of an apples and oranges approach to it. And as you know, elite level surfing, there is a speed, a power, a rhythm that is so fast and so strong that if you don't do that every day and that's not your profession, it's very hard to match that, agnostic of how amazingly gifted you may be in kind of other realms of surfing.
Yeah, and you bring up, the three biggest factors within the judging criteria: speed, power, flow. You're talking about the very elite. They're doing it at the highest level of consistency out of everybody in the world, too. So you have your tiers, you play fantasy, and that's true. John, Gabe, all those guys, they've made finals, they've won here. Leave those guys to the side. You're almost guaranteed that they're going to do well, especially based off of the result that they had at Pipeline. But to me, somebody like Kai Lenny, looking at the former results of Pancho Sullivan, Miles Padaka, these big wave Hawaiian surfers that have done well at heavy water waves, what Kai separates or separates Kai from the rest of the field is his endurance. He's easily the most conditioned surfer out there out of the whole field. And he has somebody like Doug Silva in his corner who knows the wave of Sunset Beach as well as anybody else. And you look at the past results of somebody like Billy Kemper, is also a great big wave surfer. He's won at Sunset before. He had Kahea Hart in his corner. It's almost the same definition of consistency with Kai Lenny. So he's a surprisingly good surfer when it comes to surfing Sunset Beach, but I don't think anybody should underestimate him out there.
That's a good point. And it kind of tracks with what we were saying before, is just that comfort in deep water waves, and that ocean knowledge and that experience goes quite a long way, in a way that, setting yourself up for the right wave in the right position with the right entry speed could maybe make up for maybe some of the deficiencies when you're just talking about like high performance surfing. But, honest question, are you putting Kai Lenny on your fantasy team ahead of the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach?
I am actually. I have him as a tier C surfer, obviously, because he's down in the rankings. He's a wild card due to Hurley, but he's one of those surfers that I really like out of the event. But I saw the forecast already. It looks pretty tricky. I think there's a couple of big days that'll be very windy, but it looks better than the small days that might be a little glassy. Personally, I think when it comes to surfing at sunset, I'd rather see big wave sunset, a little bit harder to surf, than smaller Sunset Point. I think we have too many of those waves on tour already, Dave. And especially when it comes to, having the mid-year cutoff now, we're challenging these surfers to bring out the greatest part of themselves. So let's go out there and get some big waves and really demonstrate why these surfers are capable of doing it in the Hawaiian Islands.
I love it. And we will see how our current front runners on the men's and women's championship tours are Jack Robinson and Carissa Moore, how they fare out there as well. Obviously, they've been, victorious at different levels of competing at Sunset Beach. It's going to be really, really exciting. The Hurley Pro Sunset Beach starts on February 12th. So everyone get your fantasy teams locked in. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and we can't wait to see what the waves do. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the lineup, episode 141. I'm Mitch here with Dave. And Dave, we were talking about Sunset Beach, our favorites, people to watch out for. But now let's get into our Instagram fan questions. First one, our very own coworker here at the WSL, at Chris Cote, subgenre points for the systems in terms of the fins. What are you liking, Dave? What are you liking out there at Sunset for the fins?
Well, it's a great question. No one should listen to what I say about fins or boards out at Sunset Beach. But I wonder if Chris is asking about, like, should the Vissla CT Shaper rankings have a subgenre point system for fins? Interesting, but I mean, I think you and I were joking. It's like we have to be pretty eagle-eyed even with the boards to see what people are writing, and I think if we added fins to it, it would drive us both bananas. But hey, you know what? If there's a partner out there that wants to pay for Mitch and Dave to sit in the beach marshal area for several days on end and take notes on what people are writing, great. I mean, fins are so essential. Like, it can take a good board and ruin it if you got the wrong setup. It could take a terrible board and improve it if you get the right setup. We have glass-ons, we've got FCS, we've got futures. He's mentioning NVS. There's all these different systems now, and in terms of what you're riding out at Sunset Beach, I probably would just go with a larger fin set than I normally ride just for the stability. But I've heard the contrary too. Yeah. Like, I've heard it's the way to go is small fins in big boards, big fins in small boards. That's what you want to do. Mitch, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's actually a great point that you bring up. And that's kind of why I nod in my head. I'm like, I'm in between personally, but I've ridden smaller fins at Sunset Beach, and they've actually worked very well. And as I said, I don't have a good track record competing there, but during the free surfs, I've had my fair share of great waves. And I can tell you, I think the first 3 events that I competed at, it was quite large on the outside. I was riding around a 610, 7.0, which is a pretty standard board for me out there. But I was riding the Clay Marzo Future fins, which I don't know if you remember. Those were like a big deal back then. And
sure, yeah.
I really love them. They had the right amount of flex for there. Right now, I'm still a pretty big futures guy. But if I were riding FCS2, probably the Mick Fannings. I think they're really good setup when it comes to having a bit more stability when it's bigger. And if I were riding my futures, I like the John Johns. They're just stiff enough to the point where I'm stable when I'm coming off of my bottom turn, especially as a goofy footer. Dude, it's hard out there. You really need to fade, and when you're coming out of that fade, you need to have as much stability as possible.
That's interesting, and I would say too, just based on observation over the last few years, all the CT surfers that ride FCS, virtually every single one of them has the fanning fin. You know, I think that's almost like the universal performance template for the CT surfers. Let me ask you this, Mitch. If you and I were there free surfing, and it was, let's just say, 8 to 10 foot, like west swell, and by 8 to 10 foot, I mean 8 to 10 foot faces, maybe the occasional 12 foot face. What would be your ideal board setup? Like, who's making it? How big is it? And what fins are you riding on that kind of a day?
I'd probably be riding Wade Tokoro 7.0. Let's go with the John fins. I could either ride mediums or larges. At that point, I think, I'm pretty even when it comes to that, especially if it's a free surf session. But I also want to have a durable leash. I need a leash that's going to withstand, that's one thing that I didn't touch on during our segment of actually talking about the actual location. But sometimes I'm seeing people wear like small leashes. I'm like, yo, this is not a comp leash wave. You better have a 7-foot leash out there that can actually withstand this kind of pressure, especially if you get caught inside and you need to bail your board. You know that thing eventually is going to snap. If it doesn't snap in the first session, it's going to snap in the second one, Dave.
I like it. I think that's good guidance too. Our next question is from another colleague of ours, I guess sort of former colleague, but one of the founders of the lineup, certainly our first producer, Mr. Ryan Fawcett, asks a bespoke question for you, Mitchell, which is, how is Mitch feeling about his Lakers? I'm assuming this is post-trade deadline this week.
Like Dave, I love Ryan. He's a former colleague of ours, but he's an Oklahoma City Thunder fan. And he's always going to be envious of the West being the best because of the Lakers. I'm feeling all right. I was really hyped on LeBron passing Kareem the other night, but that's in the past. We're looking to get gold this year, and I think we'll make the playoffs. And as long as we make the playoffs, it's clean slate after that. So I don't know where OKC is, but they're also out of playoff picture. So we'll see when it comes to the end of the season.
It's interesting because I want to get your impression of this too, because I don't follow basketball as close as a lot of people do, certainly, but not as close as some other sports, but have been trying to listen into the dialogue around the mayhem that the trade deadline has caused, and conversations about the CBA and how owners, they wanted to be able to back out of long-term contracts with players that didn't make it work, and now they've got these short-term contracts and players are flying around from trades and free agency, et cetera, and the kind of through line was, well, it becomes really hard on the fans to be fans of teams because the players, it's not like it was, 10 years ago, 15, 30 years ago, where a player would sort of be married to that team often for the bulk of their career. Now you kind of have to be like, oh, we had that great player, now they're gone. How do you feel as a basketball fan just with this sort of modern era of, in a good way, player empowerment, in a bad way, it's like, oh, my team can get cannibalized, within 6 months.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I was a huge fan of Russell Westbrook and always will be. And I was really stoked to have him on the Lakers, even though he didn't perform maybe the way a lot of people were expecting, including myself. But it's difficult, you as a fan, you don't want to see your favorite player get traded in the last minute, especially when you just bought his or her jersey. There's economic investments in there too. And I think that's even applicable to surfing now too. You look at some people that have been staples of one brand for their entire lives, and now they transition to another brand. It's like, oh, I just bought this board short because he or she, my favorite surfer, and next thing you know, they get traded. I remember back in the day, I was super hyped on Trilogy, and now they're including Trilogy 2. I know there's, some behind the scenes stuff that's going on, but I think those kind of things really bring out the best of us as surfers, and especially when it comes to a competitive scene. It's awesome to see these mini rivalries kind of brew, and when you see them go to the same team or have the same coach, a lot of times I'm just like, oh, how do I feel about that now? And I think it's applicable because we're seeing it more and more, Dave.
Totally, yeah, and I mean it's such an interesting point. I mean, you were a younger man than I am. I'm approaching 40 here in a month or so. I for sure, surf marketing still works on me, and like, oh, what's the world's best surfer looking? And oh man, they look pretty cool in that. And I wonder if I can look a fraction of that cool if I wear the same board short. But as I get older, it's more like, all right, this board short feels better. So I'm just going to wear that. And also, and this is a little bit petty, but like having been around for as long as we both have, but also having like knowing all the people, sometimes I get really petty where I'm like, that fucker didn't answer my email. Like, I'm not wearing their board shorts. Like, and it's sad that I say that, but it's the truth. And I'm like, I'm not. I know too many people at that company. I'm not wearing those things.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's the relationships that you really build, and you're like, okay, I actually like this because I like that person a lot, and now I'm gonna wear their product because of that. I don't like that person. I'm not buying anything from that brand anymore.
Yeah, I don't care how good the product is. Yeah, that's right.
All right, let's go into our third question now that we've bantered about my Lakers and I'm getting all that out. At Harper _surf, Dave, what is your favorite wave in the world to surf? That's actually a great question. I'd like to know that too.
It is a great question. Geez, it's hard to say. I mean, I guess, getting to surf at home is always special, like, because it feels different. So when home's working, Silver Strand and stuff, those kind of waves where I can get a lot of, there's a lot of waves coming, not that I can get a lot of them, but it's like, here's a ton of waves, there's lefts, there's rights, there's little tubes, there's air sections, there's turn sections. Like, I really like that. That's why I always like every time we'd go to the Gold Coast surfing D-Bah. I really like those kind of waves. But then, yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to get to, go surf restaurants, which is like a machine for goofy footers, and like go to Macaroni's, which is it's a long way of saying I don't really have a favorite wave in the world to surf. And now that my little guy's surfing, like, we'll go up to Refugio and get on the longboards and surf. And then that's like my new favorite wave, like, so it's hard. I don't know. I don't want to kind of rip off like Pat O'Connell from the Endless Summer too, but like you can get the best wave of your life like anywhere on any day, and it can always change. But yeah, getting to surf close to home and with people that in the lineup and having fun with your friends is probably up there for a lot of reasons. But yeah, what about you, Mitch? What's your favorite wave to surf?
I agree with you, Dave. I look back on the sessions that I had with my older brother and my father, and there's probably nothing that I wouldn't give, to replicate a moment like that, because I think what happens is that you get so involved in somebody in another person's life, especially when you love them so much, and that bond just like it connects even stronger now. So
right.
I think, looking back at those sessions that I have, I might say one wave that's in my hometown of Mazatlan, it's called Marmol. I remember one day it was 4 to 6 feet, real fun waves, nothing special, but it was just us three and then another 4 or 5 people that we knew too. So I'd have to say Marmol just because of like a sentimental aspect of it. But realistically, I think it's Haleiwa. As a goofy footer, I just love the way you can drop in, fade a little bit, and that lip's just waiting for you, especially if it's just slightly onshore and you get that coping. It's a great wave, Dave. I love it.
That's a great answer. And thanks to everyone who wrote in the questions at the Lineup Pod on Instagram. If we didn't get to your question, please remind us. We'll try to answer it either on the next episode or via social media. We do try to respond to everyone, whether it's a comment or a question, whether it's positive or negative. So please keep up the conversation. We're going to take one more commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to dig into the pre-Sunset Beach Vissla CT Shaper rankings. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, it is time. It is now time for the Vissla CT Shaper rankings.
Shaper ranking!
Quick reminder to everyone, we are measuring who the best high-performance shapers of the season are. We're doing that via a combined ranking where shapers are awarded points for their team riders who finish in the quarterfinals or higher, combined men's and women's ranking. And we have just finished the first event of the year, the Billabong Pro Pipeline. Mitch, what are the current top 5 standings after the opening event of the season?
So after Pipe, in the 5th spot, DHD, 9,490 points. Good start for them. Channel Islands in 4th, 12,170 points. Paizel, no surprise, with both Tyler Wright and John Florence doing so well. 12,545 points. That's solid from them. Mayhem in second, not really a surprise. And they should do well at Sunset Beach too. 14,745. That has them in second place. And to me, my pick to win this thing at the end of the season, I mean, without any favoritism, I'm just saying because of the amount of surface that they have and how well they performed based off of last year. Sharp Eye in first, 19,490. So around just under 5,000 points separates first and second, Dave. It's a competitive start to the season, I would think.
It is a competitive start to the season. We touched on this in our last episode a little bit. And those are all, interestingly enough, kind of what we would call those tier A shapers. They've got the biggest teams and they're currently occupying those top 5 spots. But the second you drop beneath those top 5, you've got Christian Bradley. He's only shaping for Leonardo Fioravanti at this moment. He's in 6th. Slater Designs. They're making boards, obviously, for Kelly Slater and Betty Lou Sakura Johnson. So they've got 2. Rusty, they've only got 1 team rider in Kylie Belly. TNC Surf, they've got 2 team riders in Brisa Hennessy and Sally Fitzgibbons. And then Smith Surfboards, who is Graham Smith, who is Jordy's dad, who shapes boards for Jordy Smith. A ton of back and forth after pipe, certainly amongst the shapers. It's been really exciting to hear them strategizing, how can we maybe pick up a few surfers? Maybe we pick them up at Sunset Beach. Maybe some of the surfers are breaking their boards. Maybe we can slip them a few of ours and try to pick up some points here and there. Had this awesome email back and forth with both Christian Bradley, who was shaping for Leo, and Stephen Bell, who Belly was sort of, what would we call him? Kelly Slater's guidance counselor, essentially, for decades on tour, manager, coach, handler, etc. And he also owns Euroglass, which is the factory out of Europe. And they were both explaining how, they've been shaping boards. Bradley's been shaping boards for Leo since he was 12 years old. Wow. He was also shaping boards for a really young Jack Robinson because Belly had that relationship with Quicksilver. He would bring all the young talent through Europe. And, Jack was one of those young Quicksilver team riders that developed a relationship with Christian Bradley and rode his boards for a number of time. Christian sort of cites being able to work with that level of talent is really impacting his ability to build world-class boards. He also made a joke about how he was working with the kids to hopefully teach them that they don't need 100 boards a year like their idols did at the time. I don't know if that lesson stuck, but he did relay that Leo was riding a step-up model he calls the Send at Pipeline, and it's evolved from sort of the step-ups he was doing years ago in Hawaii for the likes of Jeremy Flores and Dean Morrison. Jeremy Flores actually won pipe on a 6.0 early version of the Send, so it's cool to see that come full circle with Leo. Sunset, he's saying, even if the size is similar, he expects everyone to be riding, bigger boards. So he's looking at 6.4s, 6.6s, 6.8s, and he kind of said the boards he builds for Sunsets are generally less knifey, but they're built for the power turns to hold in the waves. And he cites the Hawaiian shapers as kind of having this so dialed because of their upbringing in the islands and the kind of boards they shape for Sunset Beach. So it's a really cool insight from Christian Bradley in terms of where he's come from, his relationship with Leo, and how that's evolved over the years, and what he's looking for between a pipe and a Sunset board.
It's an interesting conversation to have with a lot of people because, as you mentioned, even with the question that our coworker Chris Cote sent us about the fins, you can have the same kind of discussion about a board. I remember Reynolds Hayes, helped me quite a bit, teaching me Sunset Beach and what to ride, what not to ride. And he'd always tell me, hey, this is a wave where foam is your friend. And I'd rather have you, paddle out on a board that's just a little bit too big than a board that's a little bit too small. And I personally love having, something closer to a pin. A round pin works perfectly out there. You want something that's going to pivot well off of the bottom, but also stabilize your bottom turn when you're about to hit the lip too. And if you notice, there's been very few goofy footers that have been successful over the last few years, not including Gabe. He's just, the golden goose out there that can do everything.
Right.
But, CJ Hobgood, I think, is the last goofy footer champion that we've had out there. That was in 2008. We're talking about 15 years in separation when it comes to having a goofy footer as a champion on the men's side at the highest level. Maybe it's been done at the lower QSs, but not in a 6-star prime, a challenger, or a CT event. So when it comes to the very elite, they've had some difficulties, and I think that's where regular footers tend to have those shapers that know that wave so well. I'm talking about Jeff Bushman. I'm talking about John Pizell. And obviously, when you have a rider like John Florence, that also helps. He's a former champion out there, and he knows the wave better than anybody else.
It's a good point on how long it's been between drinks for goofy footers to be successful out at Sunset Beach. If you were to look at the draw as it stands today, men's and women's, who do you think that the best goofy foot prospects would be to claim a victory out there right now?
Well, I got to give props to their shapers while we're on this segment too, the Vissla CT shaper rankings. Channel Islands has one really talented goofy footer that I love a lot, Santa Cruz's own Nat Young. I think he has a great chance of doing well out here. He has a lot of experience competing at both the QS level and the CT level here too. What I think Nat brings to the table is that he has an incredible fade and bottom turn combination. If you look at, the performances that Ace Buckin had here back in the day, they have very similar styles. And I think Ace's best result was a semifinal finish in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And I think both Nat and Ryan Callanan from JS Surfboards can actually replicate that kind of success too. Don't want to count out Connor O'Leary because I know he's done well here in the past. There was an all goofy footer clash. I think it was in 2015 when Gabe had that incredible floater. I think Ryan, Gabe, Connor were all in the same heat. And I think if Ramsey Bukiam were in the event, JS Industries would also have a good shot with him. But it's honestly a long shot. I think they tend to underperform here because it's such a difficult wave to dominate on your backhand, Dave.
It's interesting. And what about on the women's side? We don't have a ton of goofy footers on the women's side, but you've got Tatiana Weston Webb, who rides for Sharp Eye. You've got Caroline Marks, who rides for Mayhem. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else. That might be it.
Teresa Bonvalo's going to be in the event too.
Oh, thank you. Yes, good. Yep, that's right. And she's riding for Chile, James Chile boards right now?
Yeah, she is, but I'm not sure if that's what she's going to be riding in the event. She might be riding a local shaper too. Remember, she got the call up for both events, maybe a few days, a week before the event period for Pipeline actually started. So I don't know if there was even enough time for her to prepare, boards to get from a local shaper either. So for these replacement surfers, it's difficult, Dave. Like, next thing you know, hey, you got the call up for Sunset Beach too. Are you ready? Do you have enough boards? Do you have the boards for that spot?
It's a great note, and that might actually play into her favor. If we're looking at the surfers who would have collected points for the Vissla CT Shaper rankings in 2022 at Sunset Beach, on the men's side, you've got Takoro taking 2 of those 8 spots and Arakawa taking a third of those 8 spots. And then on the women's side, you've got, Glenn Pang taking a first, Takoro taking a second, you got Takoro taking a fifth, Glenn Pang taking a fifth, and Pizell taking a fifth. 5 out of the 8 were local shapers. So, I mean, I would ask you, Mitch, just because of your competitive pedigree, out of all the venues that people compete at on the North Shore of Oahu, Haleiwa we mentioned, Pipe we've talked about, Sunset Beach. I think especially when you're thinking about the Pipe we got this year with the forecast as it was, is Sunset Beach the most, how do I put it, Hawaiian of the Hawaiian waves that you surf at, in the sense of like, no, out of any of the spots we compete at, I'm going to want to go with a local shaper.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. That's why I knew the question was coming as soon as you started your dialogue. It is the hardest wave to shape for on the planet, I would say, just because it's so dependent on the direction of the swell. how big it is, how small it is. Next thing you know, you could be surfing Sunset Point. You're riding a shortboard over there. It's rippable. It's fun. But once it gets big again, you need a board that's going to perform on that wave. And I remember Ross Williams and I were chatting about Sunset a few years ago when we knew that it was going to be back on tour. And Ross is a local boy, right? I know he's from Haleiwa, but he surfed Sunset a lot over his career. And he's told me it's not a good wave. And I agree with him. It's not a very good wave. It's a very difficult wave to surf. But what matters out there are reps. And when you have a local shaper that's been out there, knows the wave well, and that's why I think Wade Tokoro is so good and so important. And especially as a goofy footer, like there's a reason why his boards have worked out there. You know, Mick Fanning, Gabe. Last year, Malia Manuel, who's kind of been, a staple person outside of Australia for DHD. She decided to ride a Tokoro, and guess what? She made the final. She had dominated the entire event up until losing to Brisa Hennessy, who was riding another local shapers board, TNC, Glenn Pang. So I think besides the two finalists that we had on the men's side, they both rided sharp eyes, Baron Mamiya and Kanoe Igarashi. For the most part, you're probably going to see a lot of surfers ride something out of the local shapers.
I'm excited for it. Well, before we close out, Mitch, any closing thoughts for you as we're releasing this basically on the eve of the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach?
Like, go out there with low expectations. And I'm talking to the surfers because there might be a couple good days, but there's going to be a lot of days that's going to be even more challenging than what Sunset Beach already is. The forecast looks a bit difficult, and obviously, we're trying to predict the future here. We don't really know how it's going to be until the day of. But if Pipeline was any indication, prepare for some wind and prepare for surfing a bigger board out there when you're paddling out at sunset.
Right on. Well, we're going to be keeping our eyes on the world's best surfers at the Hurley Pro Sunset Beach. We're going to be keeping our eyes on the world's best surfboard shapers with the Vissla CT Shaper rankings. And Mitch Salazar, is a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. And yeah, man, I look forward to catching up down the track. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.